that same Grover Norquist, because he'll take a pledge from anybody. If I sign it, he'll put it in his file too. It's not just something he sends out to Republicans.
And cigarettes poll well, the cigarette tax.
Right.
Among smokers it polls well. It's just...
And then the argument that they say is, well, you won't get the dollar for dollar benefit because at some point it will level off, which is absolutely true, and we've never reached that point yet. Okay? And if we start charging at Canadian-style cigarette prices.
But you'll have less. You'll have to pay less in medical.
But admittedly, but if you're again, that's a red herring. They're using that as an excuse not to raise taxes. It's not a real argument. It's a true statement that may mean that long term there will be. It won't help this budget. It will help somewhere else maybe, but it will be harder to see and harder to track because you'd have to either track Medicaid expenses or you'd have to track expenses in county hospitals. Really, is where you're going to see the savings. Is that the counties will save money, not the state. So when you're talking about that state's pie, but we've never come even close because remember we're about 45th, 46th in terms of the. We've never come close to that, and you do have to remember that countries. Canada's kind of an exception, so I'll put that off to the side. But if you look at Europe, where the smoking rates are really high, and the cigarette tax relative to here, and the cigarette taxes are really high, even they have not really reached that negative return on the investment. Even in countries like Spain, where you can pay the rough equivalent of about $12 a pack for a pack of cigarettes, you still have a culture, and don't say it's right, where they'll smoke while the food's at the table, I mean, kind of thing, because it's a different culture, but it obviously hasn't changed that culture of I would like some tobacco with every activity I do, and I'm using Spain as an example because I know how much, it's about 10 euros, which is about $12 for a pack of cigarettes out there, and it hasn't, so I'm not sure, they're true, but it's a red herring. And so just say, we've never reached that. I'm not aware of a state that has reached that. And I'm not even, I would be hard pressed to find a country that has reached that point that you overcome the addictive force of a drug that is more addictive than heroin. That's not good.
But I heard that New York has done that. The pack of cigarettes in New York, I heard it's $10 or $11.
Yes.
And most of that is taxed. How is it working there for them?
Well, they're still collecting the tax. I mean, I believe the folks still smoke in New York. Now they will drive outside the city sometimes to buy that. I have heard people say that, and that does happen.
Where the impact,
but the impact is what.
Where the impact is, I mean, in general, it's not going to make a smoker stop smoking. The impact is on teenagers. We've had lots of studies. The higher the cost of cigarettes, the teenagers are very cost sensitive to smoking. So if the higher you raise it, the fewer teenagers start. And if you're not smoking by the time you're 18, 19, 20, you're generally never going to smoke. So that's the policy rationale, is not to affect the 30-year-olds who smoke for 15 years. No matter how more expensive you make it, they're going to buy it. It's to keep that 15 to 16-year-old from ever starting. And I'm sensitive to that because my son's 17 and he smokes, and it drives me crazy.
But the bottom line is it's more of a red herring. When someone mentions that, it's an excuse to vote against it, but there's nothing empirical, and we're so low on the totem pole, there's nothing empirical other than you're talking about you will create a problem a generation from now that won't necessarily be a bad problem to have. It's sort of like, yeah.
I just wanted to say in education, if people think that, even if Gwinnett County is doing a better job than the counties around us, we are at the bottom point because there have to be, with the increase in numbers in the classroom, and especially in pre-K and in first grade, you need 2 teachers in the classroom because those children have got to be engaged. To be into education, they have to be engaged with the teachers.
If you make Gwinnett County a state, this is one of the, different people pick out their statistic that they want to look at.
Right.
I look at dropout rate because I think it's hard to look at the test scores and get a sense of things. I look at the dropout rate because that's something that's easy to look at, and I don't know how to easily look at the employment rate or the college success rate, but I know how to easily look at the dropout rate. If Gwinnett County were a state, we would still be 40th. We'd have the 10th highest dropout rate in the nation if we were a 51st state. So remember that when we talk about how great our schools are. That's why I say we're a midget amongst Lilliputians. We're good because we have you know, we're good compared to what's around us, and so that makes us shine brighter. But we're still a pretty dim bulb when you look at things like our dropout rate, and when you look at our teen pregnancy rate. Our teen, and I don't know where, you know, our teen pregnancy rate. If we were a separate state, we're in, you know, in the top 6. I mean, if we were a separate state, because you get people that will break us out and compare us to other states. We would have the 6th highest. That's not one you want to be high, you know.
But I'm a substitute teacher, and I have gotten a cut in my salary this year. And the only reason you have people still going into, and more people going into substitute teaching is because of the unemployment rate, and more people are available to teach, to do substitute teaching because of the fact that they can't get other jobs, and that may or may not be happened before. And this has been a creative thing. Gwinnett County has figured out creatively how to take the person from the staff office and send them down to the classroom. I was in there yesterday, and someone came from the office to come down and help me because I've got all these first graders in there, and I need somebody else to help engage those kids.
That's an example. I mean, like I said, you know, when you cut education by $1 billion, the way you cut that is by saving personnel expenses, and districts, all 180 districts manage that in a different way. What you described is something that helps manage.
But you can only go so far down, and then it's going to start.
Are there any other questions? Because we are at the 10:15 mark. Are there any other questions for Alan? Because now I've even caught myself, you know, chiming in on the questions. Because I want to make sure. We usually try to finish by, well, we say by 12, but we usually try to get out of here by 12:30. So if there's any last questions on what's coming up in the budget and what we're dealing with on a budget standpoint going forward, I mean, mine would be, what do you think are going to be the big hot button budget problems this coming January?
It's Medicaid is going to be number one.
Because we're short of the budget.
Yes. How we fund that is going to be the big question. Is what the governor's revenue estimate is, what the pie is, what his economist is projecting, and I don't envy the governor or his economist in trying to figure that out.
I mean, the other problem, if you can pull a number out of the air, but if it's not accurate, which is sort of what we did.
And that's the reality is that most. And I'm not an economist, I don't do economic projections, but the ones I read and the ones who do it in Georgia State, UGA, even nationally, the next 12 to 18 months is a real unknown. You have half the economists saying we do a double dip, and the other half saying we're not, but not means we're going to have very marginal growth. And so you have the governor's economist has to make a revenue projection based on total uncertainty. And that will determine, if they're very conservative, then there'll be a lot more budget cuts across the board. Education will be hit.
When you're Medicaid as the big, you include SCHIP, which is peach care.
No.
Is that off?
Peach care, it doesn't have the whole that Medicaid has.
Okay.
Yeah, that's separate.
So peach care, even though it's...
And peach care, it's only, I mean, we're only spending $60 million in state funds on it to begin with. It's the $2 billion, you know, it's the $2 billion state-funded Medicaid program that, you know, I think has $1.7 billion. I should have $2 in it. That's the issue. But Georgia is still a fast-growing state. So, you know, even with optimistic revenue growth of 4, 5, 6%, which would be optimistic revenue growth, which if the governor says that. We're still barely going to be able to afford to fund the growth in K-12, to fund the growth in the border regions, to fund the growth in the Department of Corrections, to fund, you know, to try to fill Medicaid holes. We're still dealing with a huge fiscal problem. It's not a question of 3 years ago when we were dealing with budget cuts of 10, 15, 20% all in 1 year. Those days are over for the time being. But we're not close to being able to put back the money. And we still may be having to cut budgets 2, 3, 4, 5%. And again, Georgia heading into the recession was a very low tax, very low expenditure state. We had cut the low-hanging fruit 10 years ago. So even a further cut of 2, 3, or 4% is cutting into bone, forgetting about trying to put money back into the budget. So, the number one thing is Medicaid. Number two is education. Do they fund the student growth in K through 12 and border regions? Which in border regions they did not fund that last year, which is again no definition.
I talked to Rick about how instead of we used a lot. The big thing when the lottery was created is don't do what Florida did and raise the education budget K through 12. So the Constitution said we couldn't do that. So we then have been raising the Board of Regents budget, basically balancing it with lottery funds over these years.
Right. So
it couldn't be done.
Isn't there another problem with the unemployment compensation?
Yes, and Vigilio knows the right questions. Vigilio's on my board. But this is a budget issue. This isn't a state budget issue. This is kind of an off-budget issue because the UI system is federally funded. It's not driven out of the state budget necessarily. But it's a huge problem in that our unemployment insurance fund is broke. We borrowed $700 million from the federal government to continue paying on unemployment insurance benefits. We just paid $20 million in interest, and that's $20 million that we didn't have for education, and didn't have for healthcare or anything else we wanted to do. We've got to figure out a way to pay the federal government back and strengthen the unemployment insurance system to rebuild the fund. And that's going to be, the UI system is broke because we cut UI taxes for 7 or 8 consecutive years. During the good times, instead of keeping the money at the bank, we gave that money back to the business community. So when the recession hit, we did not have a fund big enough to deal with the increased unemployment. The business community basically wasn't paying unemployment, it was paying minimal or no unemployment insurance taxes for about 6 or 7 years. That's got to change. There are several proposals out there to help deal with this. There's a bill in Congress that would help fix this, that would be very beneficial to the state. What I'm worried about, and the Georgia unemployment, the unemployment we give the unemployed, we're one of the least generous, as we are in most social service states, we're one of the least generous states in the country. The average unemployment check is like $270 a week. Trying to pay rent and buy food for a family of 3 or 4 on $270 a week is not easy. And plus, the structural unemployment right now is huge. The long-term unemployed is averaging 30, 40, actually 40 or 50 weeks now. So there's not a lot of jobs out there. So it's not a fact of lazy folks who are sitting on the couch taking that huge $270 a week and having parties on it. It's struggling families can't find jobs using that money to put food on the table. One of the proposals that the Commission of Labor is talking about is cutting that benefit even more to help make up the gap. When the benefit level was not caused the problem, it was the lack of revenues from businesses over the last 7 years that caused the problem.
How did they not pay into the fund?
We, about 7 or 8 years ago, we implemented a holiday on unemployment insurance taxes. And when the unemployment insurance taxes went below a certain level, the General Assembly should have automatically, taxes should have increased. When the unemployment fund got below a certain level, automatically taxes should have increased to replenish the fund. Every year the General Assembly passed a law delaying that increase.
So illegally they did not pay to the fund.
Yeah, it's all, but it was a policy decision made by the Governor and General Assembly that businesses didn't have to pay into the fund. The end result of that policy decision is an unemployment insurance fund that is debt broke, that we owe the federal government $720 million, and that we are paying $20 million in state funds interest, and we have to pay that money back. So the policy decision now is: does the business community pay it back, or do the unemployment pay it back? And that's That's the problem. And that's going to be a huge issue next session.
Can you tell them what is the limit for getting Medicaid purely on a low-income basis if you do not have children or disabilities? $230 a month.
Yeah, I'm glad you know that. I didn't know the exact number. I just know it's ridiculously low. Like I said, it's almost impossible for a healthy, non-pregnant adult in this state to be on Medicaid.
Well,
Now
even
that,
if you're not healthy, but you haven't been on disability.
well, yes. Now, that will change in 2014, assuming the Affordable Care Act is found constitutional and President Obama wins re-election and it's not repealed. Because in 2014, Medicaid gets expanded, and it expands so adults up to a certain income level can be part of the program. And that will have a huge positive impact on the uninsured rate in the state.
All right, friends, I am going to say that we'll now institute the Democratic Party tradition of the meeting after the meeting, so I think Alan will stick around for a little bit to answer questions if you have individual questions, but I want to thank everyone for coming out, and I want to thank you for coming and talking to us.
Anytime.